Hi, it's Tom here from FDS, and the subject of today's quick and dirty mod is going to be this, the Nerf Barricade. Now, this is the unloved predecessor of the Strife, and I remembered I had one sitting in my spares bin. You may recognise it from one of my little creations before Christmas that was a hot glue horror, and I've decided just to quickly pull this out of storage, and I'm going to rewire it for you, and I'll show you how to convert it to be a bit more Elite compatible. You can see I've stripped this. If you need to know how to strip a barricade, there's loads of internals guides, and inside they're pretty much like a Strife. Trigger glue goes on here, and then on the inside of this shell is the mechanical lock for the trigger mechanism, so you can't pull the trigger without having the switch on. This is one of the things people don't like, is this on-off switch. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave that as a mechanical safety, because this will be a holstered secondary, so it's useful to have a mechanical safety, and I'm going to put a micro switch in here, which is a Nerf armor idea, and what happens then is that as the trigger is pulled gently, as soon as you start to pull the trigger, it'll turn on the flywheels, and then by the time it's fully retracted, the flywheels will easily be up to speed because they'll be on LiPo, and then it'll be able to shoot. So that'll take all the switches out to the outside, and I'm going to gut this out, and I'll put a little 2S LiPo in there for indoor games, and then eventually I'll get a mini 3S pack to go in there for other things. So the good news about the Barricade is that the motors inside are basically the same as Falcon's. The spec is extremely close, and you should get quite good results of those on 3S. Now the bad news is that it's solvent welded together, so when you take your cage out, you have to turn it over, and there are two little hidden screws on this side in here that you can see there. I've taken those out already, and then you've got to break the solvent weld, and I'll try and put this where people can see the solvent weld. So it's there at the end of my little pointer. There's a post, and the way to break that is just to put a flat-ended screwdriver right inside and then lever, and if you lever it, it'll just break the solvent weld, and then you can open it up. Now, the first job you're going to need is you're going to need some parts, and you're going to need to convert this to be a bit more Elite friendly. Now if we look at an Elite dart, you can see the flywheels contact it very lightly. Now they will shoot from those, don't get me wrong, those will work, but what we actually want to do is we want to take those off, and we want to put on, this is a pair of Strife flywheels. I'm going to use these in something else, but for this weekend I'm going to have them in here. I'm going to pull these off, and then I'm going to put a Strife flywheel on. I may have to take a little bit off the ramps just at the back. It doesn't matter, as long as they'll guide the dart vaguely centrally into the flywheels. Flywheel itself will do the rest of the job. I'm going to use just 18 AWG multi-strand hobby wire, which is the best for this job. There's not going to be huge current demands on this. I'd be very surprised, even stalling, these aren't going to pull more than 40 amps. So I've got my usual standard colour scheme. I've got black for neutral, red for positive, and then blue for feeds. Now feed is anything that comes from a switch, and those are normally positive in the way that we wire. Okay, one of the first questions people are bound to ask me is, can I do this to my Stockade? And the short answer to that is, no you can't, because the Stockade uses a different motor cage. It uses pancake motors, which are big and rubbish, and if you put any more than stock voltage to these pancake motors, they just go pop. So you're going to have to find a Barricade. If you have a Stockade, you can just use the Barricade cage, I think. I've not looked inside a Stockade much to see whether it uses the same mountings. I suspect it does. So you can see that that's a little bit larger. So I'm just going to pop those on so that you can see what it's like. I haven't fitted them on as hard as I could do. I'm going to take them off possibly later on when I rewire. Probably not. Hopefully these two flywheels are good. I don't actually know whether these are any good. Once again, we're looking for true running with these. I don't know how true this pair is. So there you have it. Those have actually fitted really well. And you can now see nice tight flywheel gap, just what we want. This is a worn dart too, and I can feel that there's some nice resistance there before it goes through the flywheels. So there you go, you're now Elite compatible. Don't wrap these in tape like some of the old stupid mod guides. You're going to spin them at about 25 to 30,000 RPM. E-tape, not designed for 30,000 RPM. Put those in a spares bin somewhere, or a dustbin, whichever you prefer. Stick with your Elite flywheels. If you do have a Stockade, you can take the flywheels off a Stockade. They're perfectly good, and they'll work just fine. So to get at your motors, you've got to undo these screws, and this is like a 3-piece. So I've taken the barrel piece off, and then I've lifted this clear, and what you've got is you've got the usual inductors, and then remember that this is your front end, where you can see the orange wire, and Nerf always wire front end positive, and then there's your two Barricade motors, discernible by the yellow end bells. And if you're ever taking these out for farming out in other things, just put plus plus, minus minus, and then you'll have your polarities all sorted. Okay, the motor block's all prepped, and I just put my first wire on there. So there's the motor wiring all finished, nice and neat running through, and then this is your negative, and that goes straight to the battery connector, and I'm going to have my batteries. I'll show you the battery compartment. Now you could do this with 3 IMR cells, but given that a pair of Rhinos pull about 10 to 12.5 amps at stool, and a pair of IMR cells or 3 IMR cells can supply a maximum of 10 amps, I think that having 2, that's potentially 20 amps there as a minimum, and having 2 of those, that's almost twice the output of those IMR cells. So I'm not going to do that. I'm going to use LiPo because I can get better discharge out of that. And you can see I've just threaded my wire back through the stock wiring loom run, and then I've double checked that there's good clearance on my flywheels. If your flywheels don't clear, they're probably not true, and if you want to, you just shave a bit off there. So you've got to put all 4 screws back in, and then you can assemble the next part. Get this bit in before you assemble the 2 halves of the barrel assembly, because it makes life a lot easier. So there we go, and then you can assemble the other half like that. It should all just slot over where it started, and then you can get your little nub in there. See, there's the nub there, it all holds together. And now you've got your motor block fully reassembled with your wires in the right place, and you can go to your shell. So you take your shell, and then we can reinstall the motor block in the shell like that, and we can work out all the wire runs. So we'll poke all of that down into place in a minute. Get all of that fitted in place. So there's your wire runs. You've got some stock pins you can put them into to keep them away from the triggers and things. I would suggest you're probably going to want these anyway to keep them well out of the way. Unlike a Strife, there's quite a lot of moving components inside the shell that get in the way. So, power wire runs. You've got motor wires, blue one is going to go to your micro switch, red one is your main power feed from the positive in the battery, black one is your main power feed from the positive in the battery. Now there's no negatives into the micro switch, you've just got a positive feed and then blue to the motors, just like in a Strife. So the wiring's no different in that respect. And then I'm going to run these 2 up here, and then the wiring will sit up here, and then they'll come out into the shell half. So I'm going to just concentrate now on wiring the switch, because that's the most important part of the build, and for that we need the trigger, and we need to see roughly where the trigger is going to go. So we can see here that the trigger, when pulled, goes back to there, and then in its natural position is actually there, because the return spring's the opposite direction. Remember, it sits, that's the indexer for the cylinder, and that always sits there, and then the pusher sits on top of it. So that's holding the cylinder in position. So the micro switch is going to sit on here, and we're going to use the normally closed pin, so that when we pull it, it opens and it closes up the circuit. So the micro switch will be compressed in that position, just like it is in a rapid strike on the pusher control switch. So it'll be in there, and then as soon as you start the trigger stroke, motors go, and you're off. And hopefully that will give a really nice clean trigger pull. You've got to pull the trigger quite a long way in the Barricade, because it has to push the pusher all the way forwards and index the cylinder. So I figure that gives plenty of time. So one of its downsides is it can't match the Strife rate of fire, because it's doing 2 jobs, indexing the cylinder and pushing the dart. Okay, so I've made the first connection, and what I've done is I put the red wire onto the common, and you've got to bend it up a little bit. So just be careful when you put that in, because there's this piece here of plastic in the moulding that gets in the way of that connection, and you don't want too much of an angle on the pusher, on the little lever here. This is a Cherry DB2, which is an older micro switch that I've got knocking around from ages ago, and it'll do for this job. Any little lever action micro switch, sub-miniature one, will do for this job. You can also put a little switch in here. You can put one of those push to make switches, but that needs a MOSFET in there to handle the switching current, because those are very, very low current. Most of them are under an amp. So if you are going to put a push button rev trigger, I would advise that you put a MOSFET on there. Follow the wiring diagram for the demolisher, where it retains the stock switch, and you just need a 10k resistor between the gate and the source. So that's worth considering if you're on a budget. I'm just going to get this, and I'm going to wire the other one up, and the other one is going to go to the NC terminal, normally closed, and that means as soon as you release it, it'll make the connection, and then you'll be off. Okay, so I've put a little bit of Devcon down one side. Let's move that out of the way. I've put some Devcon down one side, and then I'll put a bit of hot glue down the other. Just be careful if you're doing this to keep it away from the actuator. You really don't want to get it all over the actuator. Hot glue. And a good dob of the hot glue. I know you all love a bit of hot glue. It's kind of a hot glue blaster, this one. It loves it. So that's just closing and then releasing. Okay, so I've just refitted bits and pieces here, and I've secured the trigger temporarily, and you can see that's holding really nicely closed. Now you can do a bit of tweaking, you can always shave a little bit off here. I might in a minute, just to get this to close right up. So I've mounted my micro switch a little further forward, so I'm going to shave the trigger down in a minute, because you don't want it to go too far. You don't want the pusher to be sticking out, because it'll interfere with the rotation mechanism, so be careful of that. And the other thing to look out for is to keep the little switch, because it holds the jam door shut, and also you can use that to add stupid things like LEDs if you want to charge glow darts in here, which I'm going to do later. So don't forget that you've got that big flathead screw that goes in there, and you want to keep all of that in place. So don't forget to keep that one. And then I'm now ready to do my last connections, which is to put a battery connector on. Now remember, on Dean's connectors, that the male side with the prongs goes in the blaster, and the female side without the prongs, which has vanished somewhere, there it is, female side without the prongs goes on your pack, and that means that there's no sticky out bits which have current in them. Okay, so to prepare this shell half for a proper pack conversion, we've got to rip this out. Now I'm leaving this mechanical switch in because it's going to act as my mechanical safety. I've also, you'll notice, taken this piece of plastic out the bottom that normally goes over and shrouds the bottom of the cylinder. If you're going to holster it a lot, leave that in, but I'm going to just use this for divvying around with and for loading on the fly, as people are always telling me that's supposed to be really good instead of using a magazine. So I've opened up the cylinder to allow me maximum space for my big sausage fingers. So to get those out, what we've got to do is we've got to remove these tabs. We've got to bend all these tabs up like that. Get them nice and straight. You can see these are all corroded because this has been sitting in a shed and it's had small children leave batteries in it, various other things. And then we'll also rip out the thermistor which is here and a few other bits whilst we're doing it. Okay, so there's the hole I've just made for the battery connector, and that connector can then sit down in here in the shell half and give us loads of battery room. And then if you were being really picky, you could probably even fit a low voltage alarm in there if you were very, very tight for space. So that's now ready. All I've got to do is reassemble the trigger mechanism, so I'm going to go do that. This glue will be nearly set. I can reassemble the trigger. I'm going to file off a little bit off there. I'll come back to you when I put the pusher mechanism and the turret back in, and then we can just close it up and do the pack connection and we should be good to go. So I'm going to make that connection now very quickly, and then I'll test it not with a pack, remember. Okay, so there's the battery connector, and that's all nice, and that will just poke down in there out the way, and hopefully that will be clear of the firing mechanism. I can just check. Yes. So remember, when you do any kind of connection in anything you're getting over stock voltage, make sure you use good quality heat shrink, and you can measure the sizes depending on your wire. I just buy a big mix box for about £2.50, and they do it in lots of different colours. So there you go, there's the pack connector, and now all I've got to do is hook up a test pack to that, and then we're good. Okay, so I've got a little tiny 3-volt test pack looped up there, so if you can hear my motors going. So I'm going to just try and shoot a dart out. There you go, and that did fire a dart, and it fired a dart in the right direction. So that's all good, and I know that's safe, nothing's caught fire, and then I can put my mechanical safety back on, disconnect my pack. See, now that means I can't pull the trigger. So if I don't want it to come on by the micro switch, I can leave mechanical safety in place, and you've got a pistol which is ready to go and just be slung or holstered without any need to worry about that ever so sensitive micro switch going off. Finish the installation off. There's a little 2S pack. This isn't the one that I'll probably use. I've got an 850 which is a little bit thinner. This is the standard strife pack that I had lying around because it was charged, or more charged than the other one that's at storage, and the other ones are new. So nice and quiet. Should be nice and easy to use. So that's all finished. And there you go. There's how you can make your super barricade. And all I've got to do now is just screw the two shell halves together, and then I can go and do some test firing.